Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor and I'm a Sony Imaging Ambassador. Welcome to my camera setup guide for Sony's ZV-E1. Now this is being marketed as a vlogging camera, but I'm taking interest as a stills photographer. And the reason for that, I believe this camera's got some next generation stuff. And it's the stuff that I want to cover in this setup guide. Now, there's a lot of content here, so you can work your way through this by using the chapter markers that I'm going to add to the video timeline. Now, generally when I'm reviewing a camera and setting up a camera, I write these 500 and 600 page ebooks that I make available on my patreon.com/Mark Gaylor support channel. Now, I won't be writing an ebook for this ZV-E1, but I will make a 200 page PDF setup guide available to my patrons. My interest in the ZV-E1 really is to do with the dynamic active steady shot. Yes, it has that 1.3 times crop factor, but it allows me to shoot really smooth footage. Here I've been shooting at 60p and putting the footage back on a 30p timeline for 2 times slow motion. And it really becomes quite impressive when we look at this shot captured with a 70 to 200mm lens handheld. So it's not really very jerky at all. So I could get away without using a gimbal in this type of footage, and that's really my main interest in the camera. And I actually captured this footage of a dog running around with again the 70 to 200 lens, again 60p on a 30p timeline for that 2 times slow motion. Now the camera is really quite effective when I'm keeping the camera very steady with the dog running towards me, and that's because I'm over cranking the shutter speed. Again, a lot of sports photographers or action photographers don't use that 180 degree shutter angle. They will actually just over crank using faster shutter speeds. Now that footage can be a little bit tricky to capture when you're using a camera without an electronic viewfinder. So what I'd really like Sony to do is to offer a finder that we saw released with the RX1R Mark II. This allowed you to clip on an electronic viewfinder on the multi-interface shoe, and this would allow people who are shooting with long telephoto zoom lenses access to create this type of footage. Another one of the issues with doing this is obviously when you're using a long telephoto lens, it's very difficult to use the monitor, the touch tracking, to initiate the tracking. So I was assigning a custom key, in this instance on the lens, to start and stop tracking. And I'll look at some of these features as we move through this presentation. Before we get into the custom setup, I'll just like to do a brief introduction to the ZV-E1, which I think is a little bit of a mashup between 4 existing cameras. It carries the sensor from the A7S III. The body looks very similar to the Alpha 7C body. It uses the AI subject detection processor from the A7R5, and it's got the buttons and mic layout of the ZV-E10 camera, which is Sony's APS-C vlogging camera. But of course it has lots of interesting new stuff. It has the dynamic active steady shot, which we've just looked at, but it also uses the AI subject detection to hold on and track that specific subject. It has something called framing stabilizer, auto framing. It has a new cinematic vlog mode plus microphone directivity and in-camera time-lapse movies. This is basically creating movies with intervals longer than 1 second between each frame. So of course we have a full frame advantage with the new ZV-E1, and we're looking at a surface area of the sensor which is 2.5 times greater than the crop sensor found in the ZV-E10 camera, and obviously these cameras have a much larger surface area than the ZV-1, and of course this leads to increases in dynamic range, high ISO performance, and a significant increase in background blur. For instance, this was captured with the A7S camera with an aperture of f2.8, and we can see the extent of that background blur when we do a head and shoulders portrait. And of course the high ISO range, this was captured with the A7S II camera with an ISO value of 51,200. And remember, the ZV-E1 camera carries that same 12 megapixel sensor. So we're looking at those distinct advantages to using full frame. We don't get a significantly larger camera, however, than the ZV-E10. You can see it's just a little under 5 ounces heavier than the ZV-E10. And if you're not too sure how heavy that ZV-E10 camera is, it's 19 grams lighter than the Alpha 6600 camera. So we're looking at a full frame camera that's lighter than an APS-C camera in this instance here. And Sony have achieved this by basically dumping the mechanical shutter and the electronic viewfinder. And this is also the way that Sony has approached the APS-C FX30 cinema line camera. Now, one of the knock-on effects of dumping that mechanical shutter is we don't have access to a bulb mode. Basically, exposure time's longer than 30 seconds. So this image was actually captured with the A7S camera with an exposure time of 2 minutes, and this is not going to be possible with the ZV-E1. The camera body, as I said, is very similar to the Alpha 7C compact full frame camera, but if we take a look at the top of the camera, there are a lot of differences. The 3 capsule microphone, the still movie S&Q switch, the zoom rocker, and the background defocus button. Looks a lot similar on the back, but that C2 key there, which is a stepped zoom by default, although we can reprogram that custom key, that replaces the AF on button on the Alpha 7C. I actually prefer the Alpha 7C AF on button, and I'm not a big fan of the step zoom either, so I would possibly reconfigure the C2 key to AF on, and you could also do AF on plus tracking on. We also had that product showcase feature, which is that trash can button at the bottom right of the camera. If we open all of the doors on the left side of the cameras, on first glance they look very similar, but there's been a lot of changes. The SDXE2 card slot has done a 180-degree flip around. The USB-C has moved to the top of the camera, and the HDMI has stood vertically. So there's obviously been a lot of internal reconfigurations in order to get the new technology into this compact body. So first we'll look at camera setup for both stills and movies, and we'll look at first we'll look at the type of menus this camera has, and there are new menus. Okay, so we have that shooting screen, which is new to the ZV-E1, and I'd like to see this on future models released after this camera. We can simply swipe left or right to bring in touch sensitive menus, which avoids us having to go into the main menus. Now if you're working with an older Alpha camera, we can also have something called main menus. That's different from the menus, slightly confusing, but this is a new area that we can touch and access the individual controls over exposure, image size, cropping, focus, etc. And this is great because obviously using the touch menus when everything's in one long line does enable the risk of touching the wrong menu item, especially with people with larger hands. But spacing these out over the menus does allow us to touch with more confidence. And this is where an area of great improvement with the ZV-E1 is the touch menus have never been easier to use and more functional than they have on this particular camera. Now this main menu feature has appeared on previous cameras. I think it first appeared on the FX3 and now also is on the A7R5, and I dare say it will be a feature for every subsequent model. So if you're working with a very old Alpha camera and these menus are new to you, they have color coded them. We first saw this arrive with the A7S III and the Alpha 1 camera, and now they're rolled out over all cameras. And you'll find pretty much everything that you're looking for in a named menu, such as most things to do with focus are actually now in the focus menu. There are a few exceptions, however. There are a few areas where you'll be hunting and you seemingly can't find find the menu item you're looking for, because Sony in their wisdom have put it in one of the different menus. So first off, I'll be using these icons as we move through the camera setup, so you can quite quickly match this setup by just looking at the icon and also the tab number, and I'll list both. There is a bit of a switch. You know, if you're switching between stills mode and movie mode on that top switch, you'll see the icon change from the movie camera icon to the stills camera icon, and so that is something to watch as you move through this presentation. I'd also like to point out that you may see a number in the top right hand corner, i.e. this is page 50 of 56, but the total number of pages can change depending on how many pages you add to the My menu. I would have preferred to see Sony add the My menu option to the bottom of all of those tabs, so the number of the page would stay consistent. So I won't be using that total page number. I'll be using, say, the setup, which is that yellow toolbox icon, and say it's on setup 7, tab 7, and so you can disregard the total number of pages across the entire menus. So if you're looking for just what's new and where to find that, you'll find this on this particular screen. So you might want to just pause and take a screen grab of this, because I won't go through these particular menus in any detail. I would, however, like to point out that I did say you would expect to find all of the things to do with focus are in the focus menu, and here's something, the defocus level set is in the shooting menu, and the cinematic vlog set, which you might be looking for in the exposure color menu, where you'd find creative styles previously. You're not going to find them in the exposure color. Again, you're going to find them in the shooting menu. Time-lapse settings are different to the interval timer settings now, and the lens compensation, which is another focus feature in my opinion, is in the shooting menu, again not in the focus menu. Now there are some menus that disappear. You'll be looking for them and you just simply can't find them, and I've even found myself doing this periodically, and that is because menus that are only assigned to shooting movies will only appear when you've moved that top rocker switch to movie capture. For instance, framing stabilizer will only appear when you've moved that top rocker to movies, and then they will reappear in the menus. So just be on the lookout for that. Same as with the new cinematic vlog settings, you're only going to find that if you're in the movie mode. Okay, so another one that I should point out is the AI subject detection is a big new feature of this camera, and if we go to the subject recognition in the menus, which is in the AFMF focus menu, you'll see that we have sub options, but when I'm looking through now, we only have sub options for animal bird. But of course, if you switch that top rocker to stills, you're going to get sub options for all of these recognition targets. Again, disappearing menus depending on how you've set the mode on the camera. I'm not going to have any time to go into subject recognition in any great detail, because it would take me half an hour to cover this new feature, so I have a separate subject recognition video tutorial on this important subject on my YouTube channel. Another important update is as features are added or bugs are resolved, you'll find that this camera can quickly update its firmware by a file copied to a memory card. You don't have to connect the camera to a computer any longer. First, let's take a look at the My Menu option. And this is where you can add features, so you don't have to continually look for them in the 200 menu options, and that doesn't include the sub options. You can, if you're using a feature or a menu option pretty much every day, you can add them to My Menu. So you can basically cherry pick and just add the most important menus to your own page. For instance, I'm always changing monitor brightness. When I go from indoors to outdoors or the sun comes out, I always want to change the monitor brightness. So that will quickly give me access to set the monitor up for sunny weather. the brightest setting. So rather than having to always remember that it's on setup page 7, I can quickly add it to the My menu. And then if I always want to come back to My menu rather than the last menu page I was looking at, I can select Display from My menu, which is on that page 2, and enable that to the on. And so if I've been formatting the card the last time, it will always come back to the My menu format if I want to reformat my memory card. Essential settings. This is where I think that we will want to make these adjustments pretty much for all users. So we go to Setup tab 3 and we go different set for still movies. I would just check all of those boxes and enable that. Because we're using very different camera settings when we're shooting stills to when we're shooting movies, it makes sense that as we switch from movies to stills, the last settings that we were using for stills are retained when we return to stills. We don't get all of our settings that we'd been using for movies carrying back over into stills. Another thing that I think you'll want to do straight away is go to Setup tab 9, Power Save by Monitor, and enable that to close. It is possible to close the monitor with the view facing inwards to protect the monitor itself, but if you forget to switch the camera off and you've had a Bluetooth device enabled, the battery is just going to run flat. And this is something that I've done prior to enabling this setting. So as well as that, you probably want to arm yourself with a second battery and also purchase a battery charger so that you can charge 2 batteries at the same time, one in camera, one in the battery charger. Let's take a look at touch screens. And this is the new feature. You can have the shooting screen come in one at a time. So when you swipe to the right, only the left touch screen will come in, and vice versa. If you swipe to the left, the right side will come in. Or if it doesn't matter which way you swipe, both shooting screens will appear. My only sad thing about this is we can't customize this. We basically just have to accept the options that are available to us. I would use half of them, but I would like to reassign different ones for these shooting screens. And of course these will change depending on whether you're in stills or movies. Okay, so there we go. If we want to customize the shooting screen, we'll go into Setup tab 5, and then we can go and basically customize whether we want to swipe right or swipe left and have both or one of those menus appear. I really like this new feature called the footer screen. This allows you to control the exposure parameters just by touching these boxes. So I can simply touch the shutter speed, aperture, exposure compensation or ISO, and then quickly access those controls via touch. And this is quite a useful feature that I'd like to see on all alpha cameras. So for instance, because I've only got one a rear dial, we don't have a front dial on this camera. If I want to assign that dial to aperture or shutter speed, but I now need to get to exposure compensation, I'll just touch the exposure compensation, swipe left or right to increase or decrease brightness. So another one that you may want to customize is this display screen display settings. That's tab 3 on the setup. So we can have the exposure information time out, so they disappear from view, so we remove the clutter from the screen, or you can have them set to always on. If you're not using the histogram or level, you can disable those, and if we want to cycle through the different displays, we just hit the display button a number of times and we can cycle through more information or less information. Now let's go into the stills setup. Okay, now I am primarily a stills photographer, so I'll start with stills, but then I'll move over to movies for the second half of this video tutorial. Let's take a look at the main and FN menus when shooting stills. Now most things that we want to do, we can do just by simply touching one of these options. We can't change the exact options, but this gives us access to most things without having to dig deeper into the menus. So for instance, if I wanted to change the raw file type, I just touch the raw file type and then move from compressed to lossless compression. We can, however, customize the FN menus. So this is probably where we want to spend a little bit extra time in the camera setup for stills. So what we'll do here, because the soft skin effect for me is of no value because I'm a raw shooter and the soft skin effect doesn't get applied to the raw files, I'm going to go to the Setup, tab 3, FN menu settings, and then I'm going to replace that soft skin with ISO auto minimum shutter speed. So you can see there's a different set of 12 menu settings for stills and a different set for movies, and those will just switch automatically when we move the top switch from stills to movies. But I'm highlighting which one of the ones I want to replace. I will then navigate to that. So we're looking at the exposure tab there, which is the number 1, and we're going to go and select ISO auto minimum shutter speed, which I think is an incredibly value menu item to add to a quick access. The other things that you might want to change, for instance, if you don't change the metering mode, and I don't because I use exposure compensation, I'm just going to also add in there the control over audio signals, which allows me to remove the camera beeping at me every time I find focus. So if I want to then navigate to my FN menu, I can swipe up or I can press the FN button. All I then need to do is touch the ISO auto minimum shutter speed, and then I can swipe left or right or use that control wheel. So we can use physical controls or we can just use the touch controls, and I can then quickly move my standard ISO auto minimum shutter speed and double or quadruple that speed so I avoid any subject blur. Okay, or alternatively I can rotate the control wheel and select a specific ISO auto minimum shutter speed. And as I said, exposure compensation is a big one for me. I will make light tones lighter and dark tones darker. So cameras will often try and average everything out. So backgrounds that are predominantly lighter than average, we often use a positive exposure compensation, and backgrounds that are darker than average, we make a negative exposure compensation. And if you hit the display button, you should be able to see a histogram which will guide you, or alternatively you can use the zebras feature. And I have a separate movie on zebras, and if you're a raw shooter I will customize that to a setting which is called 109 lower limit. Let's take a look at focus settings. Okay, one of the settings that I would like to disable, which is on by default for stills, is pre-AF. It's a useful feature if you're doing selfies, so the camera will always focus on you before you trigger the exposure, but it actually gets in the way of most stills photography, and so it's something that I like to disable. So that's the AFMF for focus menu, tab 1, pre-AF, switch it to the off. Now Sony has been releasing as the default focus mode as automatic AF. It's supposed to know when to switch between single shot and continuous AF. It can make mistakes, so I like to have more control over this. So I personally set the focus mode to continuous AF by default, and it's still appropriate for static subjects as well. Focus area color is white by default, but can get lost in very bright highlights, so I change that to red. And also the focus area, you can quickly change that if you want to switch between a spot and a wide focus area. Now one of the strange things by default on this particular ZV-E1 model is Sony have decided to remove many of the focus items by default, but they're still there. You can re-enable them. In order to re-enable focus areas that you can choose, you need to go to the tab 2 on the focus menu, focus area limit, put a check in any of those you want to re-enable, and then select OK. For instance, in the tracking options, wide has been disabled. and I would like to enable that, so I'm going to check that and then add that to the list of focus areas I can cycle between. And because we don't have a joystick or a multi-selector like we do on the larger alpha cameras, in order to move a smaller focus area or a zone focus area, we need to press that center button, then move the focus area, then press it a second time to lock that focus area down in position. And I'm just showcasing this on that little graphic on the right side. As I'm pressing, I'm moving, and then pressing again to lock it into position. AF tracking sensitivity is an important one for me. It's set to standard by default, but if you want a really sticky focus tracking that locks on and stays with your subject as faithfully as possible, then you'll move down to number 1 on the tracking sensitivity and have that set to 1 locked on. And you can see here, this is the sort of scenario I'd expect to use. 1 locked on is I'm tracking somebody at a parade. If somebody walks in front of the camera, I don't want the camera to jump to them very quickly. That would be responsive. I want to have it stay with the subject even though they're mostly obscured by the obstacle walking in front of the camera. One of the things that I like using in stills as movies is this background defocus, and C1 button is often a button I will override on regular alpha cameras, but on the ZV vlogging cameras I actually would like to leave it with the background defocus. The way this works is when you press it, the aperture will open by default to the widest aperture of the lens to blur the background. This also happens if you've got the camera set to shutter priority mode, so you've got control over aperture. It doesn't matter what shooting mode you're in. So even if you're using a wide f1.4 aperture, it's going to jump to that 1.4 aperture to defocus that background. Okay, if you press the defocus button a second time, it doesn't clear the option, it moves to a clear option. So it stops the aperture down by default to f11. So you get both the background and your foreground subject sharp. You only clear the option by pressing the menu button, and then you go back to the aperture setting that you were using prior to using this defocus function here. And so what I will often do is I'll set the aperture to f4 or 5.6 and then open up wide or stop down to control how much depth of field I actually want. You do have controls to fine-tune this setting. So if you go to the shooting menu, tab 10, you do have shooting option, defocus level set. So if you move that little orange jelly bean to the center of that slider, when you press the defocus button next time, it won't open up to the maximum aperture. It may only open up to f2.8 or f4 depending on how much you've moved that slider over towards the right. Another feature that's come over from the Alpha 7R5, if you're looking for it, you'll find it by pressing the left side of that control wheel. It's focus bracket. Now it's set to just 2 or 3 images by default, so you probably want to go in there and set it to a higher number. As soon as the camera reaches the infinity focus, the furthest thing in the scene, it will stop anyway, even if it doesn't need 10 images. So there's no problem in just setting a higher number of images in that right option there. And I have a separate movie or tutorial to cover the focus bracket feature you'll find on my YouTube channel. Let's go to custom setup. Okay, so one of the things that I would really like to do is customize some custom buttons on the camera, not use the defaults, and also create a memory. So if I need to reassign a custom key, such as that C2 key, I'm going to come to the yellow setup menu, tab 3, custom key dial settings for stills. You can reprogram the custom keys for different functions if you're shooting movies or using the playback you're reviewing images. So one of the areas that I might, or one of the buttons I might reconfigure, for instance, is the movie button. If I'm shooting stills, I'm using the shutter release, not the movie button, so I might as well just reassign that to something else. I can always start and stop movies using the shooting screens by touch control, so I still have option to quickly go into shooting movies in stills mode. So what I'm doing here is I'm coming into the menus and I'm going to reassign a couple of the custom keys, and that zoom step button that I want to reassign, I'm going to reassign it to tracking on plus AF on, and you can see that I found that on the focus menu, page 2, and I can quickly reassign that to something that I find more useful. One of the things that I've done with, I added wide tracking as a focus area. If I want to target which face that I'm tracking, this is possible by, again, assigning a custom key to select face to track. By default, it will choose the face in the middle of the screen when we've got the focus area set to wide. But if I press that custom key, I've assigned it to the trash can button there, and I can quickly then assign just by pressing the button and then moving the control wheel to the left or right to select an alternate face. So I find this very useful without having to drop down into a small spot focus area. So once I've got all of the cameras set up for stills, I don't want to have to remember all of those settings, so I can recall them just by changing the shooting mode to the memory recall. So I'll reconfigure all of the settings that I've just been talking about, then going to the shooting menu, page 4, and registering a memory. So here we are, going to page 4, shooting mode, camera set memory. I'll choose a position 1, 2 or 3 to assign that to. Just be aware that those M1 to M4 settings are saved to the memory card, not the camera, and they will be removed when you format the card. So the 1, 2, 3 are really the most useful choices there. Just press the center button in the control wheel to register those settings. If you want to recall those, like basically you've changed all of your settings but you want to recall the registered settings, then you can come back to page 4. But a quicker way to recall them is just swipe up on the FN menu or press the FN button. In the bottom right hand corner we can cycle over to MR1 where I've assigned all of those still mode settings there. Okay, so let's take a look at the background defocus workflow before I move into the movie settings. So again, just press that once to shoot with a very wide aperture, the widest aperture on your lens. Press it again if you are wanting deep depth of field. This could be when you've got multiple people staggered at different distances from the camera, or when you're shooting landscapes. And then just press the menu button to clear that as option and go back to your standard aperture. Let's go and look at the setups for movies now. Again, we'll revisit the main and FN menus first. We'll look at, obviously, shutter speed is a priority for most people when shooting movies, and 1/200th of a second I would recommend as a starting point if you're using that dynamic active steady shot. Now often people will shoot with slower shutter speeds, perhaps 1/60th of a second when shooting with 30p, but if you're using that dynamic active steady shot, it's advised to shoot with faster shutter speeds. So you might be touching this particular button more often than you're used to pressing this button. Another page that's been added to when we're shooting movies on the main menus is that second page, and I can then control microphone directivity just by touching that option there. A couple of things that I might want to add to the FN menu is things like subject shift sensitivity and also AF transition speed. Now, one locked on might be useful for a lot of instances where we want the camera to be as sticky as possible to our target subject, but if we're wanting the camera to quickly change when maybe a new person appears in front of the frame, then we want to shift that to responsive. We will want want quick access to that feature. AF transition speed, I mostly want the AF to transition slowly when I touch between two things on the frame, but sometimes if it's a fast pacey video and I want quick snappy focus changes, I'll want to change that AF transition speed. Because I like using the zebras for an early warning system for overexposure, I'll also add that to my FN menu as well. One of the things you will also want to enable, a lot of people have been wanting breathing compensation to be rolled out over late model alpha cameras. The ZV-E1 has this feature, but it's off by default, strangely. I would enable that by going to the shooting menu, tab 1. You will need to scroll down because it's out of view. So you can see here I'm scrolling down to lens compensation, breathing compensation, and enabling that to on. Okay, so breathing compensation will basically maintain the size of your objects even when they're out of focus. So with breathing compensation in the off mode, you'll see when I change focus on a lens that has breathing, you will see the subject changes size. But if I enable this, this is an FE35mm f2.8 or sorry 1.4 lens, but if I've enabled that, it removes that breathing compensation. So this is a very useful feature to have if you don't have, say, cine lenses, which tend to be immune from this problem. Okay, so this is available for a number of lenses, not all lenses. So we're looking at Sony lenses specifically and late model Sony lenses. So not every lens is going to be supported by breathing compensation, but I've listed the ones here, and obviously newer lenses will be added to this list. Another thing that is very useful is something called AF Assist, and this is again possibly off by default and you want to enable this. This is if you're wanting to you're working with continuous autofocus and you want to shift from a background subject to a foreground subject, you can just turn the focus ring to an approximate position of your new subject and let the automatic focus take over, so you don't need to shift to manual focus to do this. Very useful feature to have. And so another feature that's also could be linked to that is something called Focus Map. This is like focus peaking on steroids. It lets you know what color is say blue is out of focus in the background, orange yellows is out of focus in the foreground, clear areas is your zone of focus. So that little graphic now will show you me shifting with AF Assist on, so shifting to a foreground subject, shifting to the middle subject, and then shifting to the background subject. One of the things that we have on late model cameras is the ability to shoot in 422 10-bit, which is the highest quality movies, or lower that to 420 8-bit, which was the only way of recording on older alpha cameras. Now you might want the highest quality, so you automatically put to 422 10-bit when selecting your movie quality, but just make sure your computer and software is capable of working with these higher bit depth movies. So you'll find that some software are not able to play the 422. It's a complex area. Obviously the premium movie editing software like Premiere Pro, Final Cut and DaVinci will do the 422. Older computers may struggle, so just check this before you shoot your next job in the higher quality setting. Microphone settings. This obviously the ZV-E1 camera has the best onboard microphone we've seen to date, and we have this microphone directivity menu control here. It can just automatically switch to recording audio from in front or behind the camera, or you can have manual controls to switch this. So the 3 capsule microphone is really quite a good microphone, but you may want to add an even better microphone such as as this 4-capsule ECM B10 microphone. Not very expensive and probably worth doing if you're raising the quality of your audio recording. Unfortunately, the microphone directivity menu on the camera can't control the microphone directivity on the actual external microphone. So it would be good to have Sony and future firmware updates to be able to override this physical control. That may be difficult because it is a physical control rather than a software control, but that's where you do it if you've invested in one of the better quality microphones. Another microphone that you might be interested in purchasing with a camera such as this is the ECM W2 Bluetooth microphone, which is a wireless microphone, which you can also buy the lavalier microphone, the ECM-LV1, for high quality audio when you're a long way from your subject and you want good quality audio and you don't want the complication of leads that you might have to work with microphones that don't pass their audio signal through the multi-interface shoe. Let's look at touch focus and touch tracking. So we have this by default in the FN menu. Just swipe up and you can change between touch focus, where we can shift focus between two different distances by just touching the screen, or touch tracking, where we touch our primary target and then we can move, or the subject can move, and the focus just follows them around the frame. We also have a touch shutter which will be grayed out if we're shooting movies. This is an option when shooting stills. We also have another option when shooting movies, which is to have touch tracking linked to automatic exposure. This is where we can have the option to touch, an exposure value will be acquired, as well as tracking the subject, and then we can swipe left or right if the exposure is too bright or too left. I possibly won't use this. I might just use touch tracking and use exposure compensation instead. So if you've actually touched the touch tracking, you can also, if you don't want to swipe left or right, you can also use that rear control wheel to move between touch focus and touch tracking. I want to talk to you about PAL and NTSC. These are the region codes that are important when shooting movie footage, and this has to do with whether the power frequency in your region is 25 Hz or 30 Hz. This has traditionally meant that the optimum frames per second will differ whether it's 25 or 50p in PAL regions or 30p and 60p in NTSC regions. This is primarily to avoid having flickering lights when shooting movies in different regions. But of course, when we're viewing our movie footage on screens such as mobile devices and computer screens, in a PAL region the refresh rate might not be 25 or 50 Hz, but it might be 60 Hz or 120 Hz. So this means the NTSC region code is sometimes more suitable for recording movies in PAL regions. Okay, so this is a little bit of a complicated subject, but I actually set my cameras when shooting movie footage to NTSC, even though I'm in a PAL region. This has to do with the screens I'm using. My movie clips I need to play back as cleanly and smoothly as possible on, say, an iPad or iPhone, which has a refresh rate of 120 Hz. 30p and 60p is cleanly divisible into the refresh rate of the screen, whereas the 50p may not be. And of course, if I take a look at the computer screen that I'm sitting in front of now, that has a refresh rate of 60 Hz, so that's more conducive to having 30p and 60p footage play back as cleanly and smoothly as possible. So I definitely want to be selecting that 60p and not 25 and 50p when shooting my movie footage. So we'll go into the NTSC PAL region selector, which is tab 1, and even though I've got my region code set to Melbourne, Sydney, I'll still select NTSC. Unfortunately, my camera will remind me consistently now, every time I put in a new battery or replace the battery, it's going to say you are running on NTSC. I know I would like that screen to be removed, but it's going to remind me hereafter. I've set up a couple of sample videos just to show you the smoothness of 60p, but they may not play back cleanly on this YouTube movie because I can't play two different frame rates in this presentation, but I will put links to them in the information below. So I was basically trying to outline that my 60p footage is a lot smoother than the same clip being recorded at 50 frames per second, which does jutter and stutter just a little bit on my 60p devices. So word of warning, if you are going to record in NTSC in a PAL region, in order to avoid flickering when using lighting systems, you are going to have to be careful which shutter speed you choose, and the rule of thumb is to choose a shutter speed which is divisible by the power frequency, that 25 Hertz. So for instance, I'm going to choose 1/50th of a second, or 1/100th of a second, and 1/125 and 1/200, but I'll skip the 160, the 1/80th and 1/160th. I would actually like Sony with their ZV cameras to have them set up for NTSC and just grey out the shutter speeds that are unsafe in PAL regions. Let's take a look at picture profiles and the new CineVlog settings. Okay, so my favorite picture profile is PP11. I am going to be able to select that from the FN menu upper left hand corner. That is the S Cinetone picture profile, and if you don't want to do a lot of post-production grading of your videos, this is perhaps the perfect picture profile to choose. You might also pick this up in the new CineVlog settings, which gives you that very narrow widescreen cinemascope look. Even though the actual view is like the traditional 2.39:1 aspect ratio, the movie it's kicking out is still in the 16:9 aspect ratio, basically with a black bar at the top and bottom of your footage. So this is something you could actually do in post-production rather than doing in camera. But one of the things that you will get access to in the cinematic vlog mode is you'll get access to a number of creative styles other than just S-Cinetone. So that is something to look at if you're wanting to avoid post-production grading of your footage. Let's take a look at framing stabilizer and auto framing. These are key important advances for the ZV-E1 camera, and some people will be wanting to purchase this camera just for these features alone. So again, here's me with the dynamic active steady shot handheld, no gimbal, recording at 60p, playing back on a 30p timeline, and I have not developed the ninja walk that some videographers have recorded. So this is me just clumsily stepping forward and stepping to the side just to show you how smooth, as I am a stills photographer, but how smooth I can get this without using a gimbal. So if you want access to this feature, you'll get it from the FN menu. Framing stabilizer, it's on or it's off. Okay, that's basically what you're going to be choosing there. You do have another option when you're switching it on, is you can have manual or center. Basically, if you're trying to track a subject and it gets a little bit off center, the camera will reframe it automatically to try and keep it in the center. If you choose manual, it'll try and keep it in the position that you touched on the screen. And because we're working with a 1.3 times crop factor, we do have some wiggle room for keeping the perfect framing there. Auto framing is more to do with like when we're putting the camera on a tripod and we want the camera to reframe without us actually moving the camera at all. So sometimes you could actually use framing stabilizer with the camera on tripod, which will limit the crop to 1.3. Auto framing, you'll find it'll try and get up to like a 2 times crop to always keep the framing that you've decided that you want. So if you're wanting to stabilize data and not use the in-camera stabilization, you will be able to stabilize the footage in post-production using Sony's free Sony Catalyst software. It's using the gyro data, so it does create some very stable footage, and you can get a plug-in for Premiere Pro which will also pick up on that gyro data. Let's take a look at framing stabilizer and auto framing when using a tripod. Mostly I would using framing stabilizer handheld, but I just wanted to show you the more aggressive crop that we're going to be doing with auto framing as an option. So here's stabilization, the framing stabilizer first. This is Sony's framing stabilizer feature. So this should try and keep me in the center of the frame as I move back towards my motorcycle and walk about a bit. You'll see the camera is automatically trying to reframe, but not as I move to the extreme edge. It'll kick back in as I get towards that center. Okay, so that framing stabilization is allowing me to get off center. I think that's probably done a pretty good job. This is auto framing function set to the medium height. So that should be cropping me to approximately waist height. And I'll just move back and see how this camera performs with the auto framing function. Because of the more aggressive crop now, you'll see that it tries to track me all of the way much closer to the edge of the frame than it did previously with just framing stabilizer. Framing stabilizer uses less of a crop factor than auto framing, so it can't keep you centered as you move towards the edge of the frame, and that's really all you need to remember. If you're wanting to fine-tune the auto framing options, then we do have option over the crop level that we're prepared to accept: small amounts of cropping, medium or large amounts of cropping. So we also got additional options in the auto framing settings, such as auto start and automatically switching between the full frame and the crop frame every 15 or 30 seconds. Now just take a look at this amount of cropping. Remember, it's a 12 megapixel sensor, so when we're cropping in with a more aggressive crop, you are going well under the 4K resolution of the sensor, and so this is something to bear in mind. And if you go to the Sony online or web manual, you'll see that it does tell you that you're not getting clean 4K footage. You can still select 4K and the camera will output 4K, but it is interpolating or growing that footage larger from basically a HD resolution. We've also got controls over the framing tracking speed, how quickly it'll try and follow you around the frame. We also have an option in the HDMI output to crop or not crop, so you'll get two separate footage, one that is being cropped and one that is being left as full frame. One of the really important features for a ZV vlogging camera is the product showcase feature. Now you should be able to just hold up a product like this and have the camera quickly switch to the product and disregard your face, even though you've got the human AI subject detection on. And as soon as I move that back, it should pull focus back to me. Now obviously there is also a tracking sensitivity involved. The tracking sensitivity makes sure that the snap to the product is quick. Now if you've been working with locked on AF tracking sensitivity in general photography work, this is a time really to switch to that responsive setting. And I would like to see Sony in future firmware upgrades make a link between product showcase and the responsive AF tracking. Let's take a look at custom setup for movies. Obviously a lot of settings need to be fine-tuned before we start recording movies. So you don't want to be having to remember that you've checked all of this checklist every time you start shooting movies. You do want a default that you can reliably go to, knowing that all of these settings are put into place, and then just change one or two or three of the settings as required. So again, you're going to come to the shooting mode, camera set memory, tab 4, and then basically register those as a memory. And obviously if you've got different priorities for whether you're shooting products or whether you're on location or under studio lights, you might create multiple memories on the camera. So we're coming over to recall the memory now. So rather than coming back to the main menu, we can just again swipe up on the FN menu and then select it from the bottom right hand option there. Okay, so that's a really quick way. This is Sony's ZV-E1 vlogging camera, Now I'm using this with active dynamic steady shot. This has a 1.3 times crop factor, so it's important to use an ultra wide angle lens when doing this type of work if you're holding the camera at arm's length. I'm using a Bluetooth grip to do that. And of course a 1635 power zoom would fit the bill nicely. Alternatively, you could try one of the ultra wide angle primes from like the Samyang 18mm 2.8, which I'm currently using, or Sigma's 17mm. Hopefully Sony will join in and get an ultra wide angle prime that's slightly wider than their current 20mm f1.8. Obviously I would prepare to go for a 2.8 to get that extra lightweight if you are holding the camera at arm's length. So my settings for that clip, using the ZV-E1 camera, using dynamic active steady shot. I'm using the Bluetooth grip. Now Sony have an excellent Bluetooth grip, but I'm using a slightly alternate one, which is the SmallRig SR-RG1, which has an extending arm, a bit like a selfie stick with that Bluetooth grip. So you could use the zoom lens as I've outlined, or you could use one of the wide aperture wide angle primes from Samyang or Sigma. Hopefully Sony also released something lighter than their current and wider than their current 20mm f1.8. The microphone in this instance was the ECM-B1M. Let's take a look at S&Q, which is an acronym for slow and quick settings. So again, we can create memories for our slow and quick settings. Great thing about this is now when we select a record frame rate and an S&Q frame rate, it will let us know whether this is quick time or slow motion on playback. This means that instead of recording in 60p in movie mode and then having to manually slow it down in post-production, this will automatically play back at a slower rate if I've selected 60 FPS as the S&Q frame rate. And as I said, the screen will give me a reminder that this will play back in slow motion. Now just a word of warning again, just if you choose that 10-bit, just make sure your software and computer can play back this higher data-rich movie footage. So there is obviously Time-Lapse Movies, which is a new feature for the ZV-E1, first time we've seen this, where we're going to create time-lapse movies in camera. So we're not going to find this in the interval timer settings. There is a new menu item here, which is on tab 1 of the shooting menu, time-lapse settings, and here we'll come in and set the frame rate settings. Here I'm selecting the frame rate. If you've got a 30p timeline, then you'll slow that down from 60p to 30p, and you'll set the interval time, which is the time between each frame being captured. In this instance I've gone for a 5-second duration, and this screen will tell you that it will actually take 25 minutes for to record that clip. So obviously you'll halve that recording time if your playback timeline is 30p instead of 60p. Now when you're trying to pick up whether you want to do an S&Q movie or a time-lapse movie recording, you're going to look at that on the FN menu, and you should get that screen saying, okay, are you recording S&Q or are you doing time-lapse? And so that time-lapse movies will have that little icon to let you know this is a time-lapse movie, not an S&Q movie. Again, you'll want to create memory settings for your S&Q, which will often be very different to just regular movies. So saving a settings, a CAMSET file. This is not where you just recall a group of 10, 20, 30 settings. This is where you recall all of the setup of the camera, including the custom keys, the FN menus, the My menus. You record every setting on a particular file onto your memory card, called a CAMSET file. So you'll go to the setup menu, page or tab 2, and you'll come to save load settings and then save a CAMSET file. As I said, this will get saved to your memory card, and here is the directory route. I'm showing you the directory route, but really you just drag off the Sony folder onto your computer or copy and keep it somewhere safe, so that if your camera ever needs to get initialized, which often happens when the camera goes in for repair, you can just set up the camera again from scratch using your CAMSET file. So I often make CAMSET files available for my patrons on patreon.com/Mark Gaylor, and I will possibly make one available for the ZV-E1 camera with the entire setup that I've outlined in this particular video tutorial. Before I sign off, let's take a look at crop factors and resolution. I do have, I just need to give you a few words of warning, because we are using an excellent 12 megapixel sensor, but they do have an impact when we are using the framing stabilizer and auto framing. The resolution, it's 12 megapixels uncropped, but when we're shooting in the 16:9 aspect ratio, that drops down to 10.11 megapixels, which is more than enough for 4K, which is 8.3 megapixels. Active steady shot, we actually sail in slightly under 8.3 megapixels at 7.9 megapixels. So the camera is having to actually grow the resolution slightly if we've got a 4K option selected. It really only becomes a little bit more problematic with dynamic active steady shot when we're recording just under 6 megapixels. It still looks okay most of the time. Where it really drops down is if we try and record in APS-C mode, or we're shooting in auto framing, where we can be shooting at 5 megapixels or so, and then really it's how the camera is having to grow the files a lot to get back up to 4K footage. So again, just a reminder is because of the decrease in angle of view, the 20mm, which might be wide enough when not using active and dynamic active steady shot, the lens is behaving much more like a 26mm lens when using dynamic active steady shot, and that can be a little bit tight when holding the camera at arm's length. So you're probably going to want to favor Sony's 1635 power zoom, the f4G there, or there are a couple of wide angle primes available, Samyang 18, Sigma 17mm lens. Probably what I would like to see in future rollouts of these full-frame vlogging cameras is for Sony just to make absolute best use of that framing stabilizer and auto framing option, is just to grow the resolution of the sensor from maybe 12 to 15 megapixels. I remember in the old days of HD movie capture, we often had access to 2.5K cameras, and at the moment now you can find 5K cameras, and this gives us a little bit of wiggle room when we actually want to put out 4K footage, so we can actually straighten a slightly crooked file and still output 4K without having to grow that file footage in resolution. Finally, the final category is accessories. Here are a range of Bluetooth accessories, a Bluetooth grip, a Bluetooth remote, some ND filters, maybe one of those shotgun microphones, and that wireless microphone that you can also add a lavalier microphone to. Lens recommendations. Okay, so there is that 20mm prime, but you can see how much smaller and lighter weight that 1.8 aperture 11mm on the APS-C mode cameras, and obviously that is a wider angle of view. That's an equivalent of 16.5 millimeters, and when we get up to the active steady shot, it's still giving you a decent angle of view. So really we're looking to try and get that alternative option on the full frame cameras now. So you could look at shooting in APS-C mode if you're shooting HD footage. Otherwise you are going to be looking for some ultra wide angle lenses that you can use with the ZV-E1 camera. So those could be, as I said, the power zoom, the 1635. You can see how much smaller and lighter the APS-C version, the 1020, and it's actually slightly wider than the 1635 as well. Now, bizarrely, if you're shooting in that active or dynamic active steady shot decreased angle of view, you can actually get away with shooting with the APS-C option there, the 1020. Now, you can't get away with this when dynamic active steady shot is not being activated, and you certainly can't get away with it in stills mode. But this is actually a frame from a clip captured with that 1020 on the ZV-E1 in dynamic active steady shot. I've had to zoom to 11mm just for a clean corners there. If I try and film with these zoom set to 10mm, or I pan too quickly, you'll just see the edges of the lens hood come into view. So word of warning there, it's not the perfect lens to be using. But just to showcase this lens on the ZV-E1, here is a little clip that I've captured. Currently using Sony's E10-20 power zoom lens. This is an APS-C lens, but I'm actually filming in full frame mode because of that crop factor of the dynamic active steady shot mode. And so I seem to be getting away with using that lightweight E10-20 power zoom instead of the heavier full frame lenses. And it's also giving me the angle of view in the dynamic active steady shot that I've been looking for. So just a word of warning again before you all rush out and buy this lens. It really is just usable in the dynamic active steady shot at focal lengths longer than the 11mm, and if you don't, you're going to get that weird tunnel vision that you can see in that little inset picture there. So and of course it's also not suitable for the auto framing when selecting that small crop level. You are looking for higher crop levels to be able to use that lens. So some of the options again, if you want something wider and a prime and keep a wider aperture, is maybe that Samyang lens. Obviously not as sharp as the Sony offerings, but it does give you lightweight and a wide angle of view. And there is the Sigma. Doesn't give you the wide aperture, it's an f4 aperture this time, but it is lightweight and a wide angle of view. Of course, Sony has you covered for the longer focal length. Sony has an excellent range of very sharp, compact and lightweight primes, such as the 24, 35, 40 and 50mm compact primes there. And here they all are very small, lightweight for handheld shooting when using the ZV-E1 camera. Fast 35mm with an f1.4 aperture for people who really want that background defocused effect. I wouldn't look at any other lens other than the 35mm f1.4 G Master there. Final question is, does the ZV-E1 have all of the features you want, or are you looking for a cinema line camera such as the FX30? Certainly the FX30 is a very good cinema line camera. It has that APS-C sensor, roughly the same price as the ZV-E1, but of course the ZV-E1 does have all of the new bells and whistles that I've outlined in this video tutorial, such as the dynamic active steady shot, the AI subject detection, the framing stabilizer and the auto framing. And this is going to give you absolutely the smoothest stabilized footage for people not using a gimbal. And so if you're wanting additional support for all manner of ebooks, remember I have my Patreon support channel. This is patreon.com/Mark Gaylor. You can sign up for a month and then just leave when you've got the resources that you require, or you can stick around and use those Q&A forums and I can be your mentor as you work through your alpha journey. And remember, I do have those 500 and 600 page ebooks that you can download from this Patreon support channel. Okay, so I'm Mark Gaylor, a Sony Imaging Ambassador. Hopefully you've learnt a lot from this particular support channel. Just give me the thumbs up and I'll catch you online next time.